Today's remake is Lucario, a Generation 4 classic. It was released before Diamond and Pearl to generate hype, and boy did it succeed, as it instantly became one of the most popular Pokemon, which it remains today. From its excellent movie Lucario and the Mystery of Mew, to its prestigious spot on Sinnoh champion Cynthia's team, to even becoming a Smash character, Lucario has been in the spotlight constantly. No wonder they gave it a Mega Evolution in Gen 6. Today we're going to see if Lucario managed to stay competitive under that same spotlight, or if it couldn't handle the seed's harshness and got stage fright. And so we ask, how great was Lucario actually? And in this video we'll be going over these competitive formats. Lucario started Diamond and Pearl off primarily wielding Choice Spec sets, firing off powerful Aura Spheres from its superior base 115 special attack stat. There was a lot to like about Spec's Lucario. Aura Sphere was strong stab, it had superb stab priority in Vacuum Wave, and it could smack fighting resist quite nicely with Shadow Ball and Hidden Power Ice. Lucario quickly established itself as one of the premier offensive threats of this new generation. But its days with Specs were numbered, as the player base discovered the power of physical sets. Despite Lucario's slightly lower attack stat of base 110, it hit much harder on average thanks to Close Combat's vastly superior base power relative to Aura Sphere. If we consider the example of both moves hitting a bulkless Shaman, whose defense and special defense are equal, Life Orb Close Combat easily outdamages Spec's Aura Sphere. Close Combat's colossal crushing capability catapulted Cario to new levels of consistency and celebrity. It wasn't just stronger fighting stab that made Swords Dance Lucario better either. Say you wanted to run a Lucario that boosted itself through a setup move, so you couldn't be taken advantage of through choice locks. Special Lucario was also outclassed in this department, not just because of its lower power with Life Orb Aura Sphere, but because its setup move, Calm Mind, was the weaker option as well, whereas the already stronger physical variant was boosted even further with Swords Dance. Oh, and it doesn't end there. While Lucario's speed stat was quite good for such a threat, it was its access to priority that made it as terrific as it was, since outspeeding it wasn't necessarily an option to deal with it. And physical Lucario also boasted better priority for ending games. Extreme speed. Sure, it didn't hit anything super effective, but its 80 base power was 20 base power stronger than Stab Vacuum Wave. And it had the crucial distinction of not being resisted by Psychic or Flying. If you had a faster fighting resist against a Vacuum Wave Lucario, you'd be fine, but this was very much not the case against E-Speed. Swords Dance Lucario quickly became one of Gen 4 OU's most defining Pokemon, and would remain as such throughout Platinum and Heart Gold and Soul Silver, excelling at fitting on so many different styles of teams, like Hyper Offense, more standard or bulky offense, balance, even bulkier semi-stall teams. It was especially lethal against Spikes, which it was one of the tier's best abusers of, as they pushed its close combats over the edge against bulkier Pokemon, and extreme speeds the same against faster ones. SD Lucario wasn't just great because its +2 close combat smashed through common physical walls like Skarmory, Swampert, and Hippowdon, or because its extreme speeds picked off far faster Pokemon with ease. It also excelled at finding setup opportunities despite its frailty, because its typing was absolutely loaded with useful resists, so even hard-hitting teams would often give it a turn through a choice move. Lucario's resilience in the face of passive damage ensured it was a major threat to defense too, with an incredibly hard quadruple resistance to Stealth Rock alongside immunities to Sandstorm and Toxic. Furthermore, Lucario could adapt itself to the trends of the metagame at hand and make itself far more difficult to deal with, both in nature and its last move. Adamant was preferred for maximizing its power, especially since Lucario's natural speed stat seemed tailor-made to get the job done. Its most notable example being how it outsped Timid Heatran by 1 point. But Jolly sets could be absolutely ruinous for negating offensive Suicune and Rotom appliances as checks, and for beating other Lucario, of course. Its standard at first was Crunch, letting it deal with Cresselia, Celebi, and Dusknoir that were popular in Diamond and Pearl, and this continued throughout Platinum, especially as it needed to smack the Rotom appliances. However, Lucario was also commonly paired with Tyranitar's Pursuit support, which would also target such Pokemon, so it could afford to try other moves to hit other checks. For instance, during Platinum, it could slot in Stone Edge to deal with popular checks in both Zapdos and Restock Gyarados. During Heart Gold and Soul Silver, it started using a second priority move, Bullet Punch. This let it blast past the Scarf Tyranitar that had exploded in popularity and had become a popular Lucario check, as well as ripping through Gengar. Later on, it would also be useful for Life Orb Aerodactyl that would become popular, and even outside of SD sweeping, it had its use, primarily for picking off weakened, boosted Dragon Dance Tyranitar. Eventually, Lucario shifted to using Ice Punch in the last slot for what had previously been considered its best, most immovable answer, Gliscor. Previously, Lucario had been paired with Gliscor lures like Mix, Flygon, and Tyranitar. Eschewing Ice Punch since it was pretty much meaningfully only for Gliscor, and since Gliscor was faster, it had to be used on the switch, unlike Lucario's other preferred coverage moves. However, now Ice Punch also let it tear through the newly popular Nidoqueen, whose ability to take on other Lucario variants had been a big part of its increasing usage. This brought Lucario new life as a destroyer of new forms of Stall, especially as bold Zapdos had made a resurgence as well. As amazing and defining as Swords Dance Lucario was, it wasn't the only set it could run either. Specs was left behind in Diamond and Pearl, while others emerged as the generations progressed. The first, Agility, had a spell of great popularity and success in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. With Agility, there was no need for Extreme Speed's priority, so Lucario could slot in Ice Punch alongside Crunch and turn the tables on many checks at once. Gliscor, Gengar, Choice Scarf, Heatran, and the legal at the time Salamence, even post-Salamence ban, the set remained strong for its ability to lock in endgames, unable to be checked by Pokemon like Jirachi. That wasn't all either. Scarf Lucario was quite a force in endgame scenarios, with excellent natural power for a Scarfer, as well as the ability to revenge kill a huge portion of the tier's threats, including opposing SD Lucario, and a terrific stat for cleaning up weakened teammates. It also began to have an incredibly inventive edge to its game in Copycat. One compared this with Explosion users, so that after a teammate had exploded, Lucario could switch in and use Explosion itself, much to the surprise of the opponent. Copycat also had the benefit of completely ruining opponents who had phased Lucario in with Roar or Whirlwind. Lucario developed a reputation for Copycat reverse sweeping stall teams with this strategy. Sadly, it died out, as it was discovered the move was programmed incorrectly on the simulator used, and it would only get one phase off before it would fail. But still, for a time, stall teams were utterly terrified of Scarf Lucario of all things. They pretty much needed to slot and protect and hoped they got lucky to stand a chance. Of course, Scarf Lucario was a strong set before Copycat was discovered as an option, and continued to be one afterwards. Still, above all else, Swords Dance was Lucario's defining variant. It was considered the best late game sweeper in the tier for a long time, and by a significant margin. Little else except maybe Agility and Polion can match the sheer terror and sweep potential of when Lucario was revealed at the end of a battle. It was so scary that it became somewhat of a running joke. The unrevealed last Pokemon would always be Lucario, but Lucario was simply so excellent it didn't matter. It would still rip through everything. It did slow down a bit over the years as leftovers Fire Punch Jirachi took over the metagame, a Pokemon famous for its resilience that made it difficult for Lucario to pull off sweeps with ease it had before, but still this was little more than a small bump in the road. Lucario remained one of the most terrifying Pokemon around. After all, Jirachi certainly wasn't switching into Lucario, so overall Lucario was one of the best, most metagame shaping Pokemon in Generation 4 OU, and was a significant force to be reckoned with. Oh, and that's not all. Lucario wasn't just also good in Ubers, it was arguably better. Its base 90 speed tier was very strong for the comparatively slower Ubers metagame. Most notably, it shared this speed with the likes of Groudon, Kyogre, Dialga, and Giratina Origin, and these Pokemon were usually slower. Lucario cut through Ubers the same way it did OU. After a Swords Dance, slower Pokemon got close combated into oblivion, and even the monstrously bulky Groudon with some spike support, with the exception of Giratina Origin, Giratina, and Cresselia, who got crunched something fierce. Lucario's close combat was also notable as one of the few attacks in the tier capable of truly scaring the incredibly bulky Dialga. Meanwhile, faster Pokemon like the Laddie Twins, Darkrai, Mewtwo, and Scarfers, as well as Swift Swim Kingdra, would get shredded by extreme speed. What made Lucario so ferocious was how effortlessly it grabbed Swords Dance opportunities, mostly due to its resistant laden typing that made it easy to get a free turn off of the many choice attacks it could take advantage of, especially when one such attack was so often Draco Meteor, meaning the opponent would be at -2 special attack and couldn't even try to brute force through Lucario's frailty. Nope, the Swords Dance was going off, and that quite often meant the game was over. Lucario made a superb pairing with Rayquaza. They both barraged the opponent with Swords Dance extreme speeds, and they could get set up against the attacks that threatened the other. Lucario was also utterly devastating when paired with Wobbuffet, who could generate even more free turns for it by encoring opponents with a harmless move that Lucario could set up against, like Toxic. And even better, Wobbuffet could also set up Safeguard, which prevented opponents from statusing Lucario. Forget Will-O-Wisping it with Giratina or Thunder Waving it with Lugia or Cresselia. Overall, Lucario was an enormous threat and a defining metagame force in Ubers, capping off an incredible debut generation. Amidst Gen 5's masses of power creep, many of it fighting type, the player base didn't lose their enthusiasm for Lucario. On the contrary, it was once again poised to excel, and there was even potential for a new form of greatness, as it received Nasty Plot, finally able to match its physical boosting on the special side. Indeed, Nasty Plot sets were quite popular at first, especially as their use of Vacuum Wave as their priority also gave Lucario excellent utility as a revenge killer for the incredibly broken Excadrill. The extra help against Terrakion was very welcome too. Lucario would sometimes go as far as running Air Balloon over its usual Life Orb, which allowed it to actually turn Excadrill into setup fodder for Nasty Plot. The Air Balloon was also useful for Swords Dance variants Lucario to act as an Excadrill check and would help it in one-on-ones against the likes of Garchomp and Landorus. However, after Excadrill's ban, players not only ditched the Balloon, they also ditched the Nasty Plot variant. They no longer needed to scramble to check Excadrill any way they could, lessening the need for Vacuum Wave, which otherwise remained a much less useful priority move than Extreme Speed. Additionally, Aura Sphere's lower power relative to close combat also stood out in a metagame as focused on power as Gen 5. Thus, Swords Dance Lucario once again became the standard, and it immediately demonstrated itself to be one of the metagame's elite sweepers. Once again, it found plenty of setup opportunities against the many choice moves it resisted, and it could sweep at a moment's notice, especially with the double priority set cleaving through Terrakion, Gengar, and Scarf Tyranitar with ease. Lucario became a fixture on all types of hard-hitting teams, from setup spamming hyper offense teams to more balanced spike setups, especially appreciating Tyranitar's pursuit support against walls like Jellicent and Slowbro. It was a defining offensive force throughout Black and White 1, and when Team Preview was discovered at the beginning of the generation, the player base feared it would be nearly impossible to pull off sweeps with Lucario like it had in Generation 4, because now the opponent would know it was coming, but it was a testament to its excellence that it pulled off sweep after sweep even now. Black and White 2 came around, however, and brought with it even more power creep, fighting centric again with the newly added Keldeo, the utterly terrifying Technician Breloom, and even a buffed Conkeldurr at that. Additionally, an incredible, highly splashable Lucario check, Landorus Therian, was added. All of this in addition to Lucario's very limited defensive utility in a game more overrun by threats than ever, began testing its OU viability, and though it seemed like the same old Lucario it had always been, its usage began to lessen, especially at higher echelons of battle, as the player base realized that while it was by no means a bad Pokemon, there was just very little point in using it over its competition, and this was especially exacerbated with Reuniclus eventually coming to dominate the metagame. Lucario never fell out of OU before the generation ended, but no serious Gen 5 player would consider it a true OU Pokemon. It completely ceased to be seen in high-level play. It was a sad end to what started out as another massively successful generation for the Aura Pokemon. Fortunately, Lucario was launched back to OU stardom in Generation 6 with the addition of a hilariously powerful Mega Evolution. Looking back at it, it is Aegislash-esque in how it was one of those Pokemon where you wonder how it wasn't banned immediately. Okay, at first there were more pressing things running around, true. However, once Deoxys and Mega Kangaskhan and Mega Gengar and Mega Blaziken were out of the picture, it baffles the mind how Mega Lucario lasted as long as it did. Perhaps it was the fact that it was comparatively not as outrageous as those others, but it really wasn't far behind. Now, Mega Lucario's base 145 attack and 140 special attack were monstrous, of course, but in and of themselves, they weren't that outrageous. Landorus and Thundurus Therian had long been OU after all. However, it didn't end there. Mega Lucario's ability was adaptability, which meant its stabs hit incredibly hard, as they received a double boost instead of the usual 50%. Okay, that's more alarming, but still not necessarily too much. Oh, it had stunning base 112 speed, 112 so perfectly placed as to outrun Thundurus Incarnate, itself already one of the fastest Pokemon around and so threatening because it outran speedsters Latios and Keldeo. Yeah, never mind, Mega Lucario was utterly monstrous. It even received a significant boost to its base defense, going up to a very respectable base 88. Now it would never be KO'd by Gliscor's Earthquake, even after Stealth Rock. So much for one of its best answers. Then again, so much for answers was pretty much Mega Lucario in a nutshell. It brute forced its way through pretty much everything en route to establishing itself as one of the premier Megas in OU. Almost nothing could withstand its speed and power, and Arceus helped you if it switched into a knockoff before it Mega Evolved, activating its base form's justified ability and giving it a free +1 attack boost. It was also uniquely endowed as a fighting type, comparatively unafraid of the new fairy types, as its Steel Stab would completely obliterate them. As if that wasn't enough, with adaptability helping push Vacuum Wave to greater levels of power, as well as as Mega Lucario being so fast it sometimes didn't even need priority, it could now viably attack from both the physical and special sides, and not knowing which one it would be made dealing with it even more ridiculous. The player base began calling for its ban quite quickly, and eventually Mega Lucario received the ban hammer. Better late than never. Mega Lucario's impressive profile was no longer as overwhelming in the Uber tier, but impressive it remained. Throughout X and Y, it was a fixture on Deoxys speed hyper offense teams, as it was incredibly adept at locking endgames down. Healthy teams had enough trouble withstanding its assault, let alone weakened ones. Its typing and solid defense meant it wasn't at all afraid of Mega Kangaskhan's revenge killing either, and it was an absolute force against stall. Mega Lucario also had one very important piece of defensive utility. Its stab adaptability boosted Bullet Punch was a great revenge killing tool against weakened Geomancy Xerneas, the Pokemon that had a stranglehold over the tier. It did incredible damage for a priority move, usually dealing roughly 45% at minimum and usually going higher. It wasn't uncommon for it to break 50%. For such an excellent sweeper to also provide such an important defensive contribution made Mega Lucario incredibly easy to slap on a team. Then Oraz came around, and the arrival of Mega Salamence was quite a blow to Mega Lucario. Not only did Mega Salamence check Mega Lucario, but it was also far and away the best Mega in the tier, meaning Lucario now had far more stringent competition for a team's coveted Mega slot. However, far be it from Mega Lucario to become unviable. It was more specific now, but it was also still an incredible threat. Mega Mince wasn't exactly a perfect answer to it either, as not only was it Stealth Rock weak, but Mega Lucario's adaptability Iron Tails hit it quite hard. Furthermore, Mega Lucario's powerful Bullet Punch, revenge killing Xerneas would always be valuable. Mega Salamence could never diminish that, much less replicate it. Base Lucario wasn't going to be keeping up with the Joneses of OU anymore, but it found a new home in UU, with a power level reminiscent of the standard metagames pass it made its name in, and it thus had no problem establishing itself as a threat. After a boost, whether Swords Dance or Nazi Plot, it tore through defensive Pokemon, while offensive Pokemon were picked off by priority. Many of the tier's fastest Pokemon, like Mega Aerodactyl and Scarf Hydreigon, stood nary a chance against Lucario's arsenal of priority. Some players even began using Focus Blast as fighting stab on Special Lucario. Its accuracy made it incredibly risky, yes, but it was actually the single strongest move Lucario could use, and this let it blast through the tier even more effectively. Its vast array of coverage also constantly kept opponents on their toes. Not only could you get blasted by an unexpected coverage move, the very possibility of that coverage move meant Lucario could play it like it had it and cause chaos even if it was in fact walled. Sadly, it wasn't all sunshine and roserades for Lucario and UU. Its biggest issue was that there was a lot of excellent fighting type competition. Most notably, Cobalion shared its typing, and yes, it wasn't as strong, but its far superior speed and physical bulk meant it got many more opportunities to hit the field, and thus provided a great deal of utility for its team, especially thanks to its access to Stealth Rock, Volt Switch, and Taunt. And this greater speed and bulk also meant its Swords Dance variant was, on average, a more threatening boosting threat as well. Cobalion wasn't all either, as Lucario also had to compete with the excellent Heracross. Funnily enough, Lucario had made Heracross nearly obsolete with the discovery of his Swords Dance set in Diamond and Pearl, but now Heracross was more well suited to the tier thanks to its Guts ability and good special bulk, meaning it didn't fear the tier's mini Scald, as well as its stab Mega Horn, letting it tear effortlessly through Pokemon Lucario could struggle with, like Reuniclus and Slowbro, and when Slowbro moved to OU, Slow King. Heracross provided actual defensive utility too, just like Cobalion and unlike Lucario. Finally, Lucario was overshadowed for a long time when the monstrously broken Conkeldurr was reigning over UU. It improved once Conkeldurr was banned, though it was still a rather specific choice overall, much like its Mega Form and Ubers, but this wasn't a bad thing, and indeed Lucario flying under the radar actually helped it become more threatening on the occasions it was used. Lucario is plenty strong as is, but it's at its scariest when you don't see it coming. So overall, Lucario was a solid UU Pokemon, capping off an excellent Generation 6. One place where Lucario did manage to find some success in both forms was in VGC. Mega Lucario meant Lucario finally had a place in VGC, specifically as a strong counter to one of the best Pokemon in the format, Mega Kangaskhan. It struggled with another strong Pokemon, Aegislash, but as time went on, Lucario and its Mega brethren saw tons of success across the world, including, hold on here, 2nd at Asia Cup, 5th at Virginia Regionals, 9th and 14th in Long Beach, 4th in Kansas, 5th and 12th in Brisbane, 2nd in Sydney, 6th in Perth, and 2nd in Melbourne. That's a lot of results to prove the Mon could do well, especially in Australia. Keep track of that. Let's go over some more specific builds and placements. Regular Lucario actually found its niche as a follow me user of all things. Inner focus meant Lucario could draw fake outs and still manage to counterattack with a close combat or a bullet punch. The most successful example of this set was used by Simon Yip in an extremely memorable team at US Nationals, where he used it alongside another redirector, Amoonguss, to enable his Mega Blastoise. Lucario came in on grass types that Amoonguss couldn't handle, like Mega Venusaur and other Amoonguss, and easily tanked their attacks, allowing Mega Blastoise to pop off with its crazy water spouts. Simon's biggest innovation was bringing Final Gambit as well. Gambit that allowed him to surgically remove common Blastoise counters like Venusaur by sacrificing his Lucario. This incredibly inventive team went all the way to 6th place at Nationals. A different breed of Lucario was William Hall's Specs Lucario, which was designed to kill Mega Kangas on the first turn and got him 11th in Utah. William admits that this was gimmicky, but it was an effort to stop one of the most brutal mons in the game. This was the purpose of many of the Mega Lucarios as well, including Gavin Michaels' Mega Lucario he used to get 8th at US Nationals. In Gavin's own words, every team that doesn't use Kangaskhan needs one insanely hard answer to it. In his case, Mega Lucario's ability to outspeed and do massive damage with adaptability was just the case. It's also worth noting that Gavin actually had another Mega on his team, Venusaur. Lucario was one of the more common Pokemon to run on 2 Mega teams, as even if it couldn't one-hit KO without specs, its naturally good stats and priority meant it could function well anyways, and its plug-and-play nature against Kanga teams made it really easy to choose when to put it in. Other notable Mega Lucario appearances included Wolf's 5th place at Virginia very early in the season, which was actually a nasty plot sweeper, and Blake Hopper's physical set he used to place 5th in Missouri. Lucario's 2 best placements, however, were at Worlds. Remember how Lucario's lone placement in 2013 was in Australia too? Well, 2014 marked the first time Australia made top 8 at Worlds, and the only time until San Pendelis in 2017. Dane O'Meara, who had also taken 2nd at the Melbourne Regionals with Mega Lucario, took the same team to 8th place at Worlds. While Dane ran special Mega Lucario in Melbourne, he pivoted to a physical set for Worlds based on the absurd punch of adaptability close combat. Dane was, as with everyone else, looking for a way to deal with Mega Kangaskhan, and to a lesser extent, Mega Charizard Y, though he eventually dropped Rock Slide for Substitute. But the best performance from Mega Lucario overall was Jody Azzarelli's 2nd place finish at Worlds. Jody also ran this aside another Mega, Charizard Y, and like everyone else, it served the simple purpose of removing Kangaskhan. Jody himself called it boring, but hey, 2nd at Worlds isn't that boring. All in all, there were 6 Lucarios at Worlds, 3 Mega and 3 regular, which I personally think is pretty damn cool. It's rare to find a Pokemon that actually had use both ways, and what's more, could use that variety well. 2015 marked the end of Mega Lucario's brief tenure as a premier Pokemon in VGC. Remember Chalk? Well, about 4 of those 5 Pokemon, Cresselia, Heatran, Amoonguss, and Landorus, did super well against Lucario, and the common Thundurus also walled it completely. Lucario still saw some good placings, like 3rd in Texas, 11th in Indiana, and 3rd at the UK Regionals, both Mega and not, courtesy of Follow Me. But by the time Worlds rolled around, it had dropped off in popularity almost instantly. Lucario's Steel Stab got a massive upgrade in Generation 7. It traded in Iron Tail, whose 100 base power was strong but whose 75% accuracy was unreliable, for Meteor Mash, whose 90 base power wasn't far behind and whose 90% accuracy was far more consistent. It was like Gyarados using Waterfall over Aqua Tail. Furthermore, Mega Lucario loved Gen 7's new Mega mechanics, where it would immediately receive its base 112 speed on the turn it Mega evolved, as opposed to the previous generation where it would still be base 90 as it Mega'd, thus limiting it. But such limitations were no more. It's unlikely it would have returned to OU anyway, given how badly it mangled the tier before, but with this new mechanic there is absolutely no shot. Mega Lucario excelled in Ubers once again, performing the same role it had previously in providing a superb threat on hyper offense teams, often but not always led by Deoxys speed. It thrived at blasting through opposing teams alongside Primal Groudon, one usually helping weaken the opposition for the other. Taking on both of them, as well as other hard hitters they were paired with like Xerneas, was incredibly difficult, making such fast-paced styles of offense highly consistent. Speaking of Xerneas, Mega Lucario's Bullet Punch remained as useful for it as ever. The new speed Mega mechanic also helped immediately get the jump on not just Pokemon like Yveltal, but also many Arceus forms, which had to invest in bulk and couldn't afford to outrun Mega Lucario, and outrunning them was useful on more than just the initial Mega turn, of course. Sadly, Mega Lucario's place of excellence in Ubers did not last. When Ultra Sun and Moon came around, so too did incredible competition competition on both fighting and steel front. Now dishing out brutal close combats and powerful priority was Marshadow, and hitting hard with Steel Stab, and generally being one of the best Pokemon around was Necrozma Duskmane. Notably, neither of them took up a Mega slot. Once again though, Mega Lucario remained a specific yet viable, potentially dangerous choice. It had a ton of potential, but had to be used very carefully in very certain instances so as to not squander it. Still, it remained a solid choice in Gen 7 Ubers. Base Lucario returned to UU, and there it was vastly improved upon its previous ranking in the tier. The explosive power of Z moves was just what it needed, and its Nasty Plot set became its go-to, as a Fightium Z-fueled Focus Blast turned all-out pummeling was one of the most ferocious attacks around, especially after a Nasty Plot boost. Best of all, it removed Focus Blast's heinous accuracy. Lucario's main issue was that the fighting type competition was, once again, absolutely excellent. Its closest rival was fellow Sinnoh Pokemon Infernape, which was much faster as it generally functioned very similarly thanks to Nasty Plot and Vacuum Wave. However, Lucario was much stronger than Ape, so neither outclassed the other. Ape was generally easier to fit on a team, but Lucario absolutely had its place. In addition to its power, its Steel Stab crushing fairy moves was invaluable, as was its immunity to Toxic, meaning Blissey couldn't stay in and potentially ruin its sweep as it set up Nasty Plot. Lucario also had to compete with Terrakion, but Terrakion couldn't pick off faster foes like speed boosted Mega Sharpedo, Scarf Hydreigon, Crocodile with Vacuum Wave. Lucario did. And again, Lucario's ability to act as a fighting type, which completely shattered fairy types, was unique, giving it a legitimate important niche. Lucario wasn't dominating the UU metagame, but its specific traits were not just rare, but valuable, and gave it amazing potential, which enterprising players were able to fully utilize to gain advantages over unsuspecting opponents. So overall, the 7th generation was another great one for Lucario. The 2017 season saw Mega Stones banned, significantly limiting Lucario's viability to the point of near non-existence. It only had a few notable appearances, though they were impressive. Marcus Statter used it to reach 28th at Worlds. Stefano Morena used it to reach 7th at the Torino special event. Alex Underhill used a Follow Me and Final Gambit Lucario to enable his Torkoal and Drampa to spam spread moves en route to win Fort Wayne Regionals. Barry Anderson reached 3rd at the Malmo Regionals. Martin Tail reached 5th at the Malaysia special event. Sai Yao Chan reached 7th at the Taiwan Regionals. Lucario was unleashed in its full mega form once again in 2019's Ultra Series, most commonly spamming its immensely powerful close combats and meteor mashes alongside Detect and Follow Me, allowing for interesting, unpredictable dynamics and play patterns that exacerbated the threat level of both itself and its teammates. It made excellent synergistic pairings with other Pokemon whose weaknesses were potentially exploitable but also hit incredibly hard, most commonly Lunala and Tapu Lele. They and Mega Lucario destroyed each other's answers beautifully. Mega Lucario had plenty of Mega competition, of course, so it was a specific choice, yet it was also a powerful one for the 2019 meta, both in the regular season and the postseason events that counted towards 2020, and its usage was as follows. The players on screen did exceptionally well during the 2019 Ultra Series. Overall, Mega Lucario proved its mettle once again in Gen 7 VGC. Generation 8 arrived and did not bring Megas, including Lucario's, with it. However, Lucario was a great Pokemon before it was a Mega, or had access to Z-moves, for that matter, and continued to show its greatness in Generation 8, where it started off in UU. Its physical stabs hit mostly everything hard immediately, without needing to set up, with extreme speed picking off the Pokemon that barely hung on immediately afterwards, with the exception of Doublade. Oh, never mind, since it didn't need Swords Dance to crush everything, Lucario could simply slot in Dark Pulse and blow through Doublade with ease. Mixed Lucario was a simple Pokemon. Get it on the field with Switch Move, using teammates to bypass its frailty, and watch everything in its path drop. Sadly, with DLCs coming around, Lucario was no longer nearly as impressive in its new power crept surroundings. Thus, for the first time, it dropped to RU. There, it was as impressive as the idea of Lucario and RU sounds, and it remained that way for the rest of the generation. A simple set of stabs, E-Speed, and Swords Dance blasted its way through pretty much everything in the way Swords Dance Lucario always had. Slower walls got crushed by Stab, faster threats got dropped by E-Speed. Not only did Lucario utterly thrash tier staples like Registeel and Umbreon, it was even scarier now that Inner Focus blocked Intimidate. Forget trying to pivot Incineroar into a Meteor Mash to slow it down, for instance. Try to slow it down with status and you'd be met with Misty Surge, Galarian Weezing for your trouble, protecting Lucario from debilitating burns or paralysis. And Lucario's frailty was the easiest thing in the world to bypass when Switch Move users were absolutely everything. Lucario was a powerful RU Pokemon. It didn't dominate in a flashy way, but one would fear seeing it in Team Preview, and it would legitimize that fear through its endgame sweeps. Same as it ever was, Lucario let loose in Gen 8 once again. What's that, you'd say? You want more power on your Lucario? Why, in Generation 9, it can utilize terrestrialization specifically to that end. What specifically? Well, what if you used it to use Extreme Killer Arceus outside of Ubers? Yes, that's right, Terra Normal Lucario was the Pokemon for the job, becoming even more of a lethal automatic game ender with a boost under its belt once it gained stab on extreme speed, crushing faster Pokemon with absurd ease, while its original stabs were still more than strong enough to drop the bulky Pokemon in its path. It started out in UU once again and lived up to its promise as the E-killer of UU. Once it got a dance up, the game was usually over. Oh, it didn't have the Source Dance either. It could run a Choice Band set and be even more adept at ending battles in certain scenarios. Once again, the DLC's power creep meant Lucario didn't last in UU. That was just fine. It has taken its E-killer cosplay, as one player described it, to RU, where it was once more one of the fiercest Pokemon around, usually using its go-to Source Dance set. However, it also includes Air Balloon in its arsenal, making it even more difficult to answer with grounds. Sure, it's checked by common Pokemon like Mimikyu, but every Pokemon has checks, and the fact of the matter is, despite its checks, Lucario thrives on hyper offense teams, able to sweep at a moment's notice. It's exactly the kind of Pokemon you want in such situations. That's not all either. While SD is Lucario's go-to, the last thing you want is to be caught off guard by such a strong threat, and it's not just the greater immediacy of physical force with Choice Band it can threaten either. It can completely flip the script with Nasty Plot, which doesn't just hit on the other side of the attacking spectrum, but Terras in a completely different way. It can Terra Ghost with Shadow Ball, becoming a completely different Pokemon, or it can Terra Fighting and hit absurdly hard with Aura Sphere and Vacuum Wave. All in all, Lucario has had a strong, successful Generation 9 thus far, and it doesn't look to be slowing down at all. If anything, it's likelier that more and more ways to Terra with it will be discovered. And that's it. So how great was Lucario actually? Well, it's been a massively successful Pokemon since it debuted. Fittingly, it was one of Generation 4's most iconic competitive choices, helping define the OU tier with a Source Dance set that was the late game sweeper to fear. And it was in fact so threatening, it even excelled in Ubers, arguably more so than in OU. It continued to thrive in Black and White 1 OU. Sadly, competition and power creep slowly pushed it out during Black and White 2. Fortunately, it received an incredible Mega Evolution in Generation 6 and briefly terrorized OU before being banned. It was also quite strong in Ubers, with its Xerneas checking Bullet Punch being particularly important. Meanwhile, base Lucario was a decent, difficult to fit choice in UU. Gen 7 saw Mega Lucario repeat its performance in Ubers, too strong to even be tried in OU now, while base Lucario actually improved in UU thanks to the power of Z moves. Generations 8 and 9 have seen Lucario at its lowest, down in the RU tier, but it's still a superb Pokemon there, especially in Generation 9, where terrestrializing into a normal type makes its Source Dance boosted extreme speeds the scariest they've ever been. Lucario's also had some solid success in VGC, mostly in 2014 and the Gen 7 Ultra series. Its Mega got the spotlight, but its base form had some intriguing support capabilities with Follow Me and Final Gambit, alongside the flinch from Fake Out blocking inner focus ability. All in all, Lucario has been an absolutely tremendous competitive force since its inception. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Lucario? Would you buff it? Would you nerf it? Would you bring back Mega Lucario? Whatever it is, let us know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.